near the end of his massive letter to his friends in the capital of Rome, Paul writes these words: "Always remember that this is the critical hour. It is high time for you to wake out of sleep, for deliverance is nearer to us now than when we first believed. It is far on into the night. Day is near. Therefore, let us throw off the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us behave with decency as befits the day. Certainly no drunken orgies, no debauchery, no vice, no quarrels, no envy. Let Jesus himself be the armor that you wear, and give your unspiritual nature no opportunity to satisfy its desires." The sin of sloth. I dare say you probably thought the sloth was a pointy-nosed animal who hung by his toes upside down from the branch of a tree in some far-off country. Actually, it's one of the so-called 7 deadly sins, along with pride, greed, lust, anger, gluttony, envy. They come down to us from the 4th century and a desert father named Cassian. Now, I know we're not much on sin, let alone lists of them. We prefer something like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Yet over the centuries, these have proven to be a rather profound diagnosis of the tendencies in human societies that work against humanity and happiness. So however they may seem to fit us as individuals, who can deny really that our society is also capable of these in good measure, and in our time, maybe sloth more than all the rest. Deborah Douglas, in a little essay, introduces us to sloth in this fashion. A monk is in the desert, seated at the mouth of a cave that serves as his cell. He is deep in prayer, or at least he's supposed to be, but he's finding it hard to concentrate. The day is hot, he's sleepy, distracted. Sun is high in the sky and seems to have stopped moving. He cranes his neck to see if he can see one of the other monks. It'd be better to talk to someone, anyone, than keep up this pretense of devotion. God doesn't seem to be listening anyway. The monk thinks maybe he'll just curl up in the back of the cave and sleep until supper. Nobody would know, and it doesn't matter anyway. Middle-aged social worker keeps glancing at her watch. Must be broken. She could swear that the hands aren't moving at all. She thought she could use this hour between client visits to catch up with paperwork, but now all the official forms seem even more tedious than usual. In fact, her whole job seems pretty pointless. Too many people to help, not enough money to go around. Nothing seems to do any good. Frankly, she doesn't even care much about their problems anymore. She decides to get a cup of coffee and see who's in the hallway. Maybe she'll just take the rest of the day off. She deserves a break, and who would notice if she were not at her desk anyway? Now, these are both good people, unwittingly caught in the snares of what the old church fathers called the noonday demon, the condition the Greeks called akadia, which means apathy, listlessness, indifference, lethargy, which means literally, I don't care. And I dare say there's hardly anyone here this morning who's not felt this tendency at one time or another. But more seriously, it does seem to be a broad cultural state of affairs in the world around us in our time, a spiritual malady, if you will. Our popular speech today is full of phrases that suggest an indifference and apathy that amounts to spiritual and emotional malaise. Hang loose, play it cool, don't get excited. Go to the football games at New Trier, guess who cheers? The parents in the back row, but not the kids. That's forbidden. They have their counterpart in more traditional phrases. I couldn't care less. What's that to me? Live and let live. Dorothy Sayers, the English mystery writer, says, in the world it's called intolerance, it's called tolerance, but in hell it's called despair. It's the sin that believes in nothing, cares for nothing, interferes with nothing, enjoys nothing, hates nothing, finds purpose in nothing. There is not a trumpet in our lives to call us to our feet. The late Henry Fairley, the social critic, paints with an even broader brush. Children too idle to obey, parents too sluggish to command, pupils too lazy to work, teachers too indolent to teach, priests too slack to believe, prophets too morbid to inspire. Men too indifferent to be men, women too heedless to be women, doctors too careless to care well, shop clerks too uninterested to be courteous, believers too dejected to bear witness. Now, there are obvious exceptions to the picture, but I leave it to you to decide whether, as a people, we do not often present a picture of indifference to the larger problems of the day, the poor, the war, uncaring beyond our own hobbies and interests, lack of excitement about the future in general, lack of passion for any causes beyond ourselves, be it political or social or religious. One has to wonder if the emphasis on the tolerance of all points of view, acceptance of all manner of conduct, uncertainty about solutions to all the growing problems, unwillingness to draw any lines regarding acceptable behavior, have not led to a certain lack of ability to any longer care deeply about anything. You see, sloth is not laziness. It's the tendency towards sadness and despair when life loses a sense of future, a sense of excitement, a sense of commitment. You who are on the web, check the site www.despair.com. It's there, trust me. Bobby McFerrin, CEO, describes his company as products for the times we live in. It markets a line of demotivational products. A pessimist mug, for example, you can buy with a line in the middle that says, "This cup is half empty." Bittersweet candy, Valentine-style candy hearts with messages on them like, "Call a shrink." A lithograph collection of very beautiful photos with a depressing twist. He calls them interior designs for inferior minds. It's all good fun, I guess, but you have to wonder why now and why so popular and growing his business. Does the general lassitude explain the momentary spasms of fanaticism in the baseball park or the football stadium? We all enjoyed the Cubbies' run for the pennant, did we not? It certainly added a bit of warmth and excitement to the cooler and briefer days of these past weeks. But to my eyes, it reached levels of religious fervor for many, fanaticism in the precise sense of the word. On some Sunday afternoons, enjoying the Bears game as much as anybody, I do look around in astonishment at the intense fervor and passion of my neighbors. On neighborhood fields, parents become frenzied to the point of cruelty. And what about extreme sports? And for that matter, extreme religion. Are these not perhaps reactions to the general malaise? The poet Yeats' lines of long ago seem even more profoundly prophetic today. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. But if this be a besetting sin, sickness, sadness, situation for many in our time, it is certainly nothing new. The human family has always struggled with doubt and despair. The ancient psalmist certainly knew the pits, the desperation of loss of spirit. The great mystic John of the Cross spoke of the dark night of the soul. Luther had his bad hair days. Melancholy pops up in the writings of Wesley and Calvin. Churchill referred to his black dog. We all struggle with bad moods, with down times. Maybe new is the disposition to believe that there just must be a pill somewhere or preacher or program that can easily lift our spirits without discipline and price. We all struggle. To his Christian friends living in the capital of the Roman Empire, no doubt feeling discouraged and helpless before all that magnificence and power, wondering if there's any future for the cause of their Galilean leader, Paul shouts, "Wake up." It's high time for you to wake out of sleep, for deliverance is nearer now than it was. Day is near. Surely, first of all, he's calling for them to take some responsibility for their mood and attitude. Clearly, some of us are sunnier by nature than others. Clearly, there are those for whom it is a truly clinical problem calling for medical intervention. I suspect most of us muddle around in the middle. However much the product of genes and environment we are, this old faith insists and insists that we have a measure of freedom to fight against our moods, to break our apathy, our sadness, our despair. This against the tendency of contemporary culture to say that not only are we without hope, but there's nothing we can do about it. I read one of the more classic expressions of this victim mentality recently. A woman fed up says to her friend, "Ruth, you truly are obnoxious at times." To which Ruth responds, "Oh, I know, and I'm so sorry, but there's nothing I can do about it. I suffer from obnoxious personality disorder." I think I've met her. But what are they to wake up to? What is it they're to stir to life in their heart of hearts? They're to wake up to the vision that made them who they are as a people. And what is that? Quite simply, it is a vision of the kingdom that is coming, the kingdom we pray for every Sunday morning, the vision and conviction that God in Jesus is subtly but truly present to this sad world, making it his own. You see, apathy rests in the deadly assumption that nothing particularly exciting and good is going on in the real world, nothing worth hitching mind and heart to, nothing near as exciting as the Bears or the Cubs, or maybe we ought to say the Yanks and the Marlins now, I guess. Here is excitement, says Paul, the simple conviction that God has not abandoned his creation, including you and me. God is at work through the kind of patient sacrifice and suffering that we see in Jesus, at work to remake the future. Rome does not have the final say about tomorrow, nor do the powers, political and economic and social, in our time. God is coming, cries old Paul, wake up. Perhaps you saw the New York Times report on the decline of Christianity in Europe. Both Protestant and Roman Catholic communities seem to be in their death throes. I've seen it, I know it. One wonders if it's not because of the tendency we're talking about, the lack of any excitement about a future from God worth living toward, the lack of hope, the opposite of which is sloth, apathy, despair. And one has to worry a little bit about the decline in our country of many of the so-called mainline churches. Is it not a loss of vision, a loss of faith in tomorrow? God is coming, wake up and shape up. Day is near, let us throw off the deeds of darkness. You see, the vision of what God is up to is supposed to stir a new passion in us for what we may be up to, working in our own way and place toward that future. For Paul in that time, it came down to some very simple things: no drunken orgies, no vice, no quarrels, no envy. In other words, God's kingdom begins in us as we demonstrate in our own lives the character of its citizens. We witness to the coming of God by the way our own lives exhibit his rule, both personally and in the larger world. What does the reign of God look like? Look at us. What an enormous thought and responsibility to wake up to tomorrow morning. But it can give life passion and direction against the apathy and indifference around us. One of the major problems we face, as did they, overwhelmed by the impressive power of Rome, was the feeling that their lives didn't really count for much. Despair didn't make any difference. Does the struggle and discipline to be God's man, God's woman, really make any difference? But what if doing what we are, where we are, and with whom we are can provide small beachheads here and there for the invasion of God's rule over his whole creation? Is that too big for us? Sounds pretty significant, does it not? I must confess that in my struggle to keep myself awake, I am helped most by the inspiration of others whom I observe living with passion, with purpose. Some of you here this morning, some out there in the churchyard. I turn also to the arts, to music and poetry, partly out of the long ago observation that the old book is mostly poetry. Poetry seems to evoke vitality and passion and spirit in a way that prose cannot do. Indeed, we sing poetry every Sunday morning when we sing our hymns, don't we? The Wall Street Journal set to music just wouldn't quite do it for us, would it? But one of my favorites, in the judgment of many, one of the finest poets of the 20th century, author of 4 collections, poems in New Yorker, Paris Review, New Republic, Atlantic Monthly, Poetry Magazine. Her name is Jane Kenyon. I commend her to you. Her husband writes of her, Jane was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan in May 1947. Her father, Reuel, played piano all his life, toured with American dance bands. Jane's mother, Polly, had sung with orchestras in nightclubs. And when her children were born, turned seamstress and teacher of sewing. Family lived on the outskirts of town on a dirt road opposite a working farm in a house crowded with pictures and books and music. Jane went to a one-room school through the 4th grade. During junior high school, she began to write poems. At the University of Michigan, where she majored first in French and then in English, she won the Hopwood Award. He goes on. We met in 1969, courted in 1971, married in 1972. In 1975, with Jane's encouragement, I quit my university job as professor and we moved to a family place in New Hampshire. Her readers are aware of Jane's lifelong struggle with depression, but also her joy in the creation, in flowers, music, paintings, hayfields, her dog. We had almost 20 years together at Eagle Pond Farm, engaged separately in a common enterprise. They were both poets. Commonly loving land and house and church and friends, Jane died of leukemia on April 22nd, 1995, at the age of 48. But through it all, she was sustained by her faith and poetic vision. Turned off on religion by a grandmother who was too full of rigidity and hellfire talk, she found her way back to faith in a little local church in New Hampshire where she and her husband became active. But it is her poetry that tells her story, reveals first of all the vision that sustained her, the vision of the presence of God in the midst of life, in all the simple mundane things, in flowers, music, paintings, hayfields, her dog, land and house, and children and friends. And then near the end, she wrote a piece she entitled Notes from the Other Side, a vision most important to her as she faced her end. I divested myself of despair and fear when I came here. Now there is no more catching one's own eye in the mirror. There are no bad books, no plastic, no insurance premiums, and of course no illness. Contrition does not exist, nor gnashing of teeth. No one howls as the first clod of earth hits the casket. The poor we no longer have with us. Our calm hearts strike only the hour. And God, as promised, proves to be mercy clothed in light. But before and around and through these visions came also a mission of great passion. In an interview once, she was asked somewhat sarcastically, "What's the poet's job?" She said, "The poet's job is to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth in such a beautiful way that people cannot live without it. To put into words those feelings we all have that are so deep, so important, and yet so difficult to name. The other job the poet has is to console in the face of the inevitable disintegration of loss and death, all of the tough things we have to face as humans. We have the consolation of beauty, of one soul extending to another soul and saying, 'I've been there too.'" So the mission included the discipline and struggle to truly live with and for others. Through her work, she worked diligently against her depression, day in, day out, all the way to the end. After her husband's second surgery for cancer, she refused to wallow in tragedy. Her enormous resilience of spirit battled back, searching for light. She explained that she outwitted the storm one summer by going outside before it struck and cutting every full open peony in sight, bringing them into the house so that she and her husband could savor their beauty. She commented, "We are getting an education this summer in the humanities. I would say in love despite fear. And daily we grow in the determination to cast off trouble like a garment in the heat and keep going, keep living, and living abundantly with more awareness of each moment and each joy." Here's one human being wide awake to the presence of the kingdom now and in every tomorrow. But each of us have a poem to write.